Well, hello everybody. Happy winter. Brian's here. Brian, say hi.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, it's getting cold out here in Nebraska. I
Yeah.
got my Boston stuff on, Brian, because the Bruins won today in overtime. Still a big Bruins fan. They've had a 6-game losing streak, but they pulled one off today, so I'm happy. Yeah,
Outstanding.
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 Well, everybody, listen, we want to actually talk to you a little bit about, we have a lot of people watching this. Would love to have you give us some input. We're not getting a lot of input
Yeah.
from people or comments or even like private comments. You don't have to put
Yeah.
it on, on the, the YouTube thing. But if you want to do it, just privately, would love to hear from you. We promise, and I want to, we probably need to say this as much as we can. We're not going to quote anybody unless you want us to. So if you want to talk to us privately about some things that are going on with all the church hurt stuff, we're not going to just take that and
Nope.
put it in our little file cabinet and throw it out there, unless you give us permission to do that. But we're going to guard that information as much as we can. So just
Yeah.
just FYI.
Absolutely.
So
And if you got a critical comment, if you think we've got something wrong, or we're being too harsh or whatever, please, we're open to hear that. Um,
Brian is. I'm not.
well,
I'm
okay.
just kidding. No, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, send it our way for sure. Well, Brian, this is one of the podcasts that I've been kind of looking forward to because we're going to be talking about Christian bubbles. As soon as I say that, I'm not talking about the Lawrence Welk bubbles that go up, during the really big shoot. No, that
Well,
was the
those
other
are
guy.
champagne bubbles, Mike. Everybody knows a good Christian won't go anywhere near alcohol. So
Oh, yeah, that's right. Uh, no, the Christian bubble is the best way to describe it is that protective place that Christians live. I would just say so they don't have to face reality. But it comes with language. It comes with the way they act, and we're going to kind of break that down. But I want to tell a story to start this out because I came out of Boston, Massachusetts. I was a street kid that became a Christian when I was 20 years old. So I didn't know the language. I didn't know the culture. I didn't know how people acted. I didn't know any of that stuff. And so it was all very new to me. And kind of as I got into it and became a leader and then got hired up in Rockford and I kind of fumbled my way through it and tried to speak the language as best I could just to fit in. And we'll talk about that later. But I got a job out in Denver, Colorado after Rockford, and I worked for this church, and definitely a lot of bubble people there, like people that just talked Christianese. They just talked the talk, and it was praise God, brother, and brother, and all this stuff. And I went along with it. I didn't talk like that, but I tried the best just to kind of understand it. But one day, it kind of came in my face, and I had some interns that I had raised up that were kind of like me, like some of them, not all of them, but a couple of them were kind of tougher kids and came from some tough backgrounds. Anyways, I was over having breakfast at this restaurant near the church, and this one of the guys who was really into the Christian language at the church. I mean, you couldn't talk to him about football. You know what I mean? Because he would be like, "Well, brother, there's 12 guys, there's 11 players, and that's God's holy number." He would tie something to do with God into whatever you talked to him about, right? So I tried to avoid this guy as much as I could. So, but one day he got me, he trapped me, and so we're at this restaurant, and he sees me, and he comes over to the table, and he's like, "Hello, brother," and I'm like, "Ooh," and so he goes, "Hey, I heard good things about your youth ministry." And so, at that time, the youth group was growing and some things were happening. So it was a buzz around the church. So that's why he came over. He wanted to congratulate me for, increasing the bubble, as they say. So anyways, he comes over and he goes, said that. He said, "Yeah, brother, I heard great things." And I tried to say a couple things that were happening. We had some kids give up marijuana, whatever. I don't know. A few kids gave their life to Christ, whatever. And swear to God, Brian, he points to his arm and he goes, "Ooh, I'm getting glory balls." And I was like, "Wait a minute, what? What'd you just say?" and he points to his goosebumps. I guess he was getting goosebumps, and he calls them glory balls. I was like, "You getting glory balls? I go, don't you need to see a doctor for that?" That was what I was thinking. I mean, my brain was like, "Oh my god!" So I paid the bill, got the heck out of there as fast as I could, ran over back to the church into the youth department, and gathered the interns around and went, "Gather around, children. I have a story." So I told them the glory ball story, and oh my god, it was like that became the thing. Like in our youth group, it was like they all every time anything was happening, somebody would come up behind me and go, "Ooh, I'm getting glory balls." Like, it was horrible. But and here's the thing, and what bothers me about it is that he lives in that bubble, so he's so into that Christian bubble that he doesn't realize that that's pretty stupid to say, right? That he doesn't realize that's
Yeah.
kind of
Right. Yeah.
to anybody, that's just really weird,
Right.
right? It's just, I mean, come on, be with it enough to know that is not like there's so like that's my pet peeve is people get so stuck in that bubble and that language becomes so familiar to them, and that means they're blocking everything else out. And I'm not saying the guy needs to go around knowing what the slang terms are and things, but that's pretty universal, right? And so the fact that he didn't know glory balls was going to get mocked um, was just a little over the top for me. What are your thoughts?
Well, number one, my 65-year-old teenage mind went right to what everybody else is going to think when they hear
Right.
that term, right?
Getting glory balls.
And it is. It's funny because it's this affected behavior that people put on to do and say the things that they perceive that they need to do and say to be part of the group, right?
Right.
And my thoughts about that is that most people do that not because there's some internal like driving force that causes them to do that, but they perceive at least some external pressure that says, okay, I want to belong, so I better do this thing.
Right. I better talk the language.
Yep.
Because it's not, I mean, that's a pretty extreme example of that being over the top. But what I object to is, the language of, we talked about it last week, but, virtue signaling and, that kind of thing where the language is definitely, Christian language is designed to push the wrong, push people away and bring people in, right? It's like, if you don't say the right thing, do the right thing, act the right way, it's behavior, modification stuff, right? And it comes out in the language, right? The word vernacular actually means a set language, like, MIT grads or whatever would have their own vernacular. Like people who work in the tech department have their own vernacular. Astronauts have their own vernacular.
Yep.
There's a set of words that just pertain to them, and I don't have a problem with that if you're work in that one of those areas. But when it comes to Christianity and you're trying to win people and let people know who Jesus is, that exclusive language that says we're better than you, that says we have our own, you can't say these certain things, or you're not gonna fit into our club. I've always objected to that. I can't stand that stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you're a rocket scientist, it probably helps you communicate with other rocket scientists by using that vernacular. This isn't rocket science. This is being a real boy in a real world. For 200 years, there was no organized church. For 200 years after Jesus, there was no organized set of beliefs. For 200 years, it was the wild, wild west. It was people like living their lives and trying to do the best they could to follow this, this rabbi that was named Jesus, and follow his teachings. And when it comes right down to it, there is no similarity between people who are using the vernacular to communicate and what Christianity really has to offer the world. It has to offer. It's a way to live life in the world, and living life in the world means that you're not in some kind of bubble. You're just another dude. You're just another you're just another woman. You're just another person moving through life, um, meeting life's challenges, living life's joys, enduring life's setbacks. Um, you just have a different paradigm with which you deal and encounter all those things.
Right. And you look at Jesus' life, he wasn't in the bubble. I mean,
No.
he objected to people being in that bubble. Right?
Yeah.
He was around, we talk about this all the time, but he was around some of the toughest people on the planet, right?
Yeah.
Some of the people that definitely did not live in that Christian bubble, or that not but that godly bubble, that religious bubble, that talked the right stuff, and um had their own set of rules. He was outside of those rules all the time, and that's what drove them nuts, right? And now Christianity today is bubbles.
Yeah.
They live in that protective commune, basically, called church. That and again, we say this all the time. Not all churches are like this. I get it, but our experience has been, that it's like that it's very restrictive, and Jesus wasn't like that.
Yeah. Yeah. He wasn't. He Obviously, we can read stories about Jesus and how he taught in the temple, but we read more stories about how he taught in a boat, or he taught out in a field, or he went to a Pharisee's house, or you know, he picked 12 really rough dudes, to walk around with him. Anywhere from fishermen, and I mean, we're not talking about some guy sitting in a bass boat, drinking a Bud Light, smoking a cigar, casting. I mean, it was hard work to be a fisherman, right? We're
Right.
talking about, we've talked about the mafiosi tax collectors that hung out with him. I mean, those dudes
Yeah.
wouldn't get past the front door in any of the
Right.
churches you and I worked for.
I was talking to a guy this week. I was at a school, and I know this guy. I mean, I know of him, and I know where he worked before. He's a teacher there now at the school, but he worked for a parachurch ministry that I'm aware of. And we just started talking, and he said, he goes, 4 of the guys in my wedding that were in my wedding. His wedding was only like 5-6 years ago. He doesn't talk to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, why? And he said, because they're part of the church he went to and the ministry he was involved with, which is part of the same thing, that went through a rocky time, and he got pushed out of the bubble because he started seeing some things, and he started to expose some things that the pastor was doing, that the leader was doing, and he got pushed out. And so the guys that were around him, that were his best friends, even though they knew he was right, they had a secure place in their bubble. That bubble for them was their livelihood, right? So a
Right.
few of them. So in their connections to family and connections to to each other. And so when they pushed him out of the bubble, that particular bubble, he got, you know they lost all his friends. I mean, they lost. And he had one of the friends came to him and said, "Look, I know you're right, but that's my boss, and he hates you, so we have to hate you." And that's where that bubble gets really confusing to me, Brian, because it, as far as the world goes, right, they're looking in at Christianity. And if you're a Christian today and you don't know that, you're an idiot, because they're looking in to see, as soon as you say you're a Christian, they go, let me look at this life and see,
Yeah.
what this is like. And whether it's passive or it's direct, they're looking in. And so what do they see? If they saw that and went, oh, that's just like my family. As soon as you tell the truth, you get pushed out of the circle, right?
Yeah.
It's called scapegoating, right? You're going to
Yep.
scapegoat this guy because he's saying the truth. Why is that different than the world? Why is that different than my family? Why would I join that, right? And that's been my experience too, and your experience
Mm-hmm.
is that those people that are in the bubble, once they're in that bubble, they need that bubble, right? They need it to survive. They need it for a lot of reasons. And so truth becomes secondary, or even in third place or fourth place or fifth place, right? It's not a premium anymore. What becomes more important is your survival, emotionally. And so you sacrifice character, you sacrifice principles for that bubble. What do you think of that?
Uh, yeah, and the reason that you do that is um, because you're really making a value judgment. You're making a choice. Do I want to be part of this group? And I mean, I have sympathy with people who, are under that kind of a pressure to keep their job, right? Or do I want to pay the price to get out of that? So I'm not going to judge anybody who has to toe that line because they fear for their job. What I am going to judge is that if you are in a ministry that says that you are representing Jesus Christ and you treat your people that way, then your behavior is antichrist. That is not in harmony with how Jesus would treat people. And you know what? I would say to these guys' bosses, I mean, I'm sure they're not watching this, but I'd say check yourselves, dude, and go home. And until you can straighten up and fly right, take the cross off your neck, take the fish off your bumper, and take the Jesus out of the name of whatever graft or scam you're running, because it's not a Jesus-looking ministry if you're treating people like that.
Right. No, and that's been my experience too. Is people in my life that were pledging to be my brother, right, and friends forever, and we're soldiers together. I watch a lot of Jordan Peterson reels and some of the stuff that he does, and you can like him or lump him, whatever. But I really like the fact that he puts a premium on truth. And I love
Yep.
what he says about relationships, that relationships are brutal, like real relationships that matter, that are they're gonna last the test of time, are brutal. Like they're brutal because you have to be brutally honest with each other about things. And so that requires a depth, a trust, a fight, a willingness to get dirty, a willingness to hear truth about yourself. That and I thank God I have friends like that. I
Yep.
really do. I'm so proud of myself in this sense, not like in a weird way, but like I'm really grateful that I have that mentality, that anybody that's in my life, including my wife, my current wife, Rachel, we've been married for 10 years. There's been some knockdown dragouts, but both of us are committed to hearing the truth about ourselves. And some of the things that she has said to me has been hard for me to listen to, but it solidifies our relationship. It makes us stronger. And that's why we have a strong relationship. My friends, like I'm going to name some of them, like Matt Kitchen, Todd Walker, Kevin Barker, Dan Torres. Dan and I got into some heavy duty, like almost fisticuffs a couple times. One time I texted him because he wasn't answering my texts, and he's a tough guy. He's the one guy probably on the planet that I wouldn't fight, that I know personally. I mean, he just is. He's tough. He's a
Yeah.
tough kid.
Yeah.
And I texted him one day because he wasn't answering my texts, because he didn't want to talk, because we had some issues, right? And so
Yeah.
I texted him, never thought Dan Torres would be such a blank, 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 knowing that when I hit send, he was going to respond because I know him, and he did. And I thought, oh, I'm going to die today. And we ended up meeting, and you know what we did, Brian? We sat down at Perkins and we talked about the crappy stuff that neither one of us wanted to face,
Yeah.
right? But that's what you do. That's what you do. In contrast, I'm just going to say his name, Corey Demmel, who was my intern for years and really helped his wife, probably kept her alive. And bottom line is, we had a conflict. I run into him at a church event and I confront him with that. He literally turned around and ran away from me. Like literally ran, like not just figuratively ran. He ran.
Yeah.
He's basically skipped away from me
Yeah.
because he did not want to face the truth. That's why we won't be friends. And you know what? I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying that I'm right in the situation, but I'm not moving on and pretending that we're in this Christian little bubble and we're all fake and fun unless we talk about the real issues.
Right.
But that's what happens to those people when they're in their bubble. They surround themselves with bubble people and bubble talk, and that's safe for them.
Yep.
And I don't want to live like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. When I don't know. It's probably been since maybe just a few years when we started going to Bellevue Christian Center. Um, uh, sure, I always question things, but I would say probably our last 10 years there were really intense. And as I've reflected back on that time, I saw that I was trained to operate out of that sort of insecure place because I thought what my job was is I knew what I believed was to be true. And my job was to try to convince everyone that would listen to me that they should think like I think, that I was right and that they were wrong and they would change their mind. And I wish I could take that back. I wish I could wind the clock back and do that differently. Because by the time we got to the end of it, I had realized that no, that's not really that's not a healthy way to have relationship with people. What I really want to do is I just want to be in a place where I'm free to have differences and explore those differences and have conversations and not be judged and ostracized because I'm not buying in to the party line, right? And that is kind of the conversation I had sitting in Gary Hoyt's office when basically I was told you're not going to get that here. Had an honest conversation. I said, look, this is really what I'm looking for. And it was like, well, you're not going to find that. And in his mind, it was like, you're not going to find that anywhere because I wasn't going to find it there. So I'm not going to find it anywhere. And to me, that is the difference, is that when you care more that the people that are around you agree with you and thus validate you than you do that the people around you are, I don't know, loved and honored for what they are, even if they were right. Let's say I was 100% wrong in everything I was saying. You're not going to get anywhere in a relationship if you're not willing to love each other beyond those differences. That's why your marriage and my marriage works, right? You always hit bumps in the
Right.
road. You always hit places where you disagree. You always hit hard times. But it's the love for one another that carries you through that. And
Right.
my point here, I guess, I'm sorry I'm kind of prattling on, is that maybe what's absent in those bubble relationships is selfless love, because it seems to me that what you're really trying to do is enforce selfish validation.
Right. And if there's any place that there should be selfless love, it's in the church, right? But it's a
Exactly.
joke, right? How many churches on the planet have had these scenarios? I mean, anybody that's watching this right now knows that this scenario that we're bringing up, people that we know, but there are names you could bring up, right? That
Yep.
that have conflict with each other, that some egos got involved with maybe the music team or the worship team, or some egos got involved with ministry credentials, or the way somebody handled something. But instead of having the conversation and going, hey, let's sit and talk about this, a lot of times pastors will gaslight, right? They'll turn around on you. You told me about a story about you confronted a pastor, and he turned around and said, well, what's the Holy Spirit saying to you? Well, that's gaslighting. that's
Yep.
that's Christian bubble talk for,
Right.
I don't want to hear this, right? So I'm gonna turn this around on you. So and I have this, because I have pastor in front of my name, I get to say that to you. And then and a lot of people just go away. They go, okay, yeah, you're right, I should be, and that shame and that guilt comes on. And no, you have a right to ask questions and
Right.
to try to get answers on specific things. And again, that whole bubble mentality is in. I'm on my paper right now. I'm putting the B in a circle, and a bunch of little B's around it. Well, the big B is the superstar. The superstar Christian, right?
Yep.
You can't be wrong. They can't be wrong. You have to just take what they say. We've talked about that before. With that whole "don't touch not thine anointed" and all that bullshit. But basically, that they become that superstar, and then you
Right.
can't ask questions, right?
Right.
Because they know better, and that's
Right.
a bunch of garbage.
It is. So let me put it in a little different context. So the other day, I wrote an email about some meetings that I'm going to be having in my job that deal with transforming some things. I'm going to be helping the people I work for work on some transformational projects. And I sat down with the guy who runs our department. So he's my boss's boss. And he said, look, I really like what you wrote here, blah, 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 blah. This part down here, I don't really agree with what you're saying. And here's why I don't agree with it. And I said, well, I get your point, but here's what I was really trying to say in here. And we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we had an adult conversation. And, we walked out of the room, and I understand what he wants. And I'm going to give him what he wants because, that's an employment situation. He's my boss. I essentially signed a contract to say, okay, I'm going to do, what you ultimately decide for me to do. Okay. That's one realm. And by the way, they treat me better. I've said this a number of times on this podcast than anybody in the church ever treated me. Now the other side of that scenario is what you're talking about. You're in a church,
and they pay you.
And they pay, yeah, which they sort of did, but not really. Yeah. On the other side, you're in a church. You're there on a voluntary basis. You're there to contribute to a community, and you're not in an employment situation. And these people with pastor in front of their names, they don't have any particular authority over you. We could do a whole podcast on that, but you know what? They don't. They get up. They're anyway. I'm not going to go off on that. You're volunteered to be there. You don't owe them that same. You didn't sign that employment contract you did like when you got your job. This is a different dynamic, and they don't have a right to say to you, you don't have a right to question. And how do they say that you don't have a right to question? Well, they either come out and say it, and they pull this fake power dynamic because they're the holy man, or they just ostracize you. You stop doing what you're doing. You stop talking to people. People stop talking to you. And that's just really, really, pardon me, out there in TV land, that's just really shitty.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And Eileen kind of went through that, like, last couple of weeks when she was talking to us.
She did.
About her situation with Jeannie, how, they just stopped talking. What Jeannie would do, and this isn't just Jeannie. I mean, other ministries do this too, where they get to those people that are friends with her and say, don't talk to her because she's doing this, she's doing that. And that to me is just awful. And again, it goes back to, they don't want the tough conversations because they may be wrong. Like at least your boss had the guts enough to say, hey, look, I disagree, or I'm having a problem with this part. Please explain this to me. That's, like you said, that's an adult conversation.
Right.
Let's talk about that. Right. But the bubble people don't do that. Bubble people just surround themselves with bubble people, other bubble people, and they, I was thinking about this podcast this week, and I was thinking about when I first took the job over in Bellevue, there was a guy, I'm not gonna say his name, but everybody kept telling me that he was on fire for God. And that's a bubble slogan.
Right.
That means, to me, means you're an arrogant little shit. And he was. And he went around and and he was all the above. But I gave him a chance. I sat with him and again, I had this conversation with him, and it was all about Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And listen, love Jesus, but we're winning the world. We're not winning the church, right? If you're going to win the church, know the church language. But we're winning the world, right? We're supposed to be out, the Great Commission, right? Remember that, Christians? And so we've got to be able to know how they talk. And so I'm talking to this guy, and I gently at first try to like tell him, hey, listen, you should probably try to speak English, sometimes, like use da-da-da. I try to help him with it. And dude, the more I pushed him to do that, the more it felt like to him that I was trying to secularize him, and finally one day I just had it. I walked into the leadership meeting and I threw him a dictionary. I go, dude, you need to learn English language. And then 2 weeks later he quit the youth group. And that was the best thing that could have happened to us. He just left because he couldn't talk bubble. I wouldn't let him talk bubble.
Yeah.
I pushed him and I had the conversation with him. I didn't just make fun of him. We had several lunches to try to talk to him about it, but he wanted to keep, and to me, it was lazy, and it was his superiority that he was using. Like it was his way of being, the man of God, instead of just being humble and washing feet and being approachable.
Yeah.
He wasn't.
Yeah, I was going to say that the thing that I value, and I think most people value in relationships, is humility, the things, humility, honesty, transparency. And
Yeah.
being a bubble person violates all of those things, I believe. I mean, the humility is violated, as you pointed out, because somehow you gain a sense of superiority because, you speak this higher language or whatever. Honesty,
Right.
obviously, you're not being honest. Transparent, obviously, you're not being transparent because nobody is really like that, right? Unless you're a
Right.
psychopath.
Yeah.
And let me just make one more
Yeah.
point that's I think worthy of adding to this conversation. A lot of this too is a result of the bunker mentality a lot of churches have, right? It's like we're gathered in here, it's us against them, it's us against the world, They're a threat to us, but we're going to go out beyond our walls and we're going to conquer this thing. And again, if we look to Jesus and his example, I don't see a bunker mentality there, right?
Right.
Um, if you want to talk about the Great Commission, go out into all the world. Um,
Right.
there wasn't this sort of us and them mentality. There was this us mentality,
Right.
and I think that's a really important distinction to make here, because if you're in a place that has that bunker mentality, then you're living in the worst kind of bubble.
Yeah. And that's the guy that I talked to about his parachurch situation asked me, he goes, how do you think we're going to change that? And I just said, I don't know if we're going to.
Yeah.
I don't know until the money dries up,
Yep.
because it's a factory. I've been reading this book called The Anxious Generation, and it's basically talking about Gen Z coming up and what they're like and why, and it's kind of the science behind what we've been seeing as educators. Um, these kids are really fragmented because of the internet and social media, and so it gets into the science of it. It's been a fascinating book. I'm really glad I read it. But one of the things that dawned on me, even though it has nothing to do with church that I'm reading about, I'm thinking about church. I'm thinking about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're not going to be able to talk bubble. Like
Yeah.
they're not going to, these kids, these Gen Z kids, when they get into 25, 30 years old, they're not going to church, Brian.
Yeah.
They're not going to sit and listen to someone talk for 45 minutes. I'll guarantee it.
No.
I mean, we're already seeing mass amount of people leaving churches
Right.
because of all kinds of things that we've mentioned and, whatever. But just the idea that someone's going to sit there and listen to you talk for 45 minutes and give your opinion about God to them when they could be on their phone and in these, these short narratives that they're getting now on some deep, very deep things, right? They don't need to sit
Right.
there. They're not going to. And so you're going to see that dry up. That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong on that, but unless churches change their game, and we could even do a whole podcast on that, it's that model is going to die. It's already dying, but it's going to really die. And in 10 years, it'll be obsolete.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. We should do an entire podcast
And
on that. But again, I think ultimately, and let's face it, there's a lot of bubbles that you can be in on social media, right? Um,
right,
as well. I think some of those
right,
bubbles are going to dry up. I think people, again, I think there's enough information out there. What they're looking for is honesty, you know, transparency. They're looking for people who are real.
right.
I
Yeah,
see it, you see it all over the place. And I think that's what's ultimately going to cut through. And I agree with you that the church isn't going to change until the money dries up. And there's a way for that to happen. And we can all contribute to that.
yeah, yeah.
And there's another podcast. Man, Mike, I think we just planned out all of 2025 right here.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this podcast on Bubble Talk, the bubble, the Christian bubble. Hopefully, it's made some sense to you. And I want to say this: have you been in a, you've been hurt by the bubble? Because, we're joking around about it, but it can be
Yeah,
vicious too. It
it
can be
is.
vicious when a group of people decide to push you out of their sphere of love, and they blame you because you weren't, you didn't talk the language or you asked the wrong questions. That can be really hurtful, and I'm
Yeah.
really sorry if you've gone through that. And so,
Yeah,
would love
yeah,
to, again, love to hear from you. And so, reach
yeah.
out.
And I'll just underscore that if you've gone through that, the rejection you feel is real, right? The
Yeah.
pain of that you feel is real, and we would love
Yeah.
um, for you to reach out to us, or talk to somebody about it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well,
All
thanks
right,
everybody. We'll see you on Thursday, groomed in 10.
all right, and
All
keep
right.
those cards and letters coming,
Bye.
boys and girls. Bye.
Glory balls. See ya. Maybe we shouldn't end with that.